Right, it's February the 11th, 2005, and I'm talking to Conda Hamel, and we're going to talk a little bit about experiences in World War II. And I think you just started to say that you nearly joined all the services, but you better start with that, how you nearly did and you didn't, and then what you did next.
Yes, very, very difficult to know exactly sort of what to do, because in fact I was doing temporary announcing, radio announcing, in Belfast, because they asked me to do it. I mean, this is awfully nice, really. I got my BBC jobs by being asked. I'm not suggesting myself, but I've been acting with the group theatre, which is Belfast's sort of Abbey Theatre.
Yes.
And I've been acting there and doing therefore a lot of radio plays.
Yes.
And they suddenly, they needed an announcer. I mean, you know, their announcer was going on holiday or going to London for a spell. Would I come in and do it? So the infinite sort of care they took. A man came from London to see if my voice worked, how I pronounced things and so on. And one got going and had a very interesting time, and then the war broke out and Belfast was disbanded. So
Can
then
I just
one thought,
was it unusual having a woman announcer? Because I think of my memories of wartime announcers are all male.
well, not in London. I mean, you know, there were, well, overseas. I only did overseas for the last month that I was there, but I had, 3.5 years home service. There was Lillian Duff, Joy Worth, Andrea Trowbridge, Wendy Waddell, Mary Malcolm, and she'd gone on to another one. But we were just, there were six girls all working with Stuart Hibbert and Alvar Liddell.
Yes,
and
those are the
all
names one
together.
remembers, yes.
Sweet lot they were.
Yes.
And anyhow, they having done that little bit of announcing, and then there was a lull, and I got this SOS, could I come over to England and help with the nursery school that had been evacuated, 60 little children from 3 to 6,
Yes.
down in Buckinghamshire. So I thought, all right, I'm doing nothing, I'll do that. No idea who owned the house or anything. At that I stayed for 9 months in.
And these were these evacuated?
These were little slum children, so to
Yes,
speak, you know.
yes. In East London.
And their sorrowing parents, you know, who'd come down to see them. The child would rather be with you, who knew better almost. And it was awfully funny when I went into Paddington to get my train down to Princess Risborough. I picked the best-looking porter to take my baggage and put me and said, when I said Princess Risborough, going anywhere near Loseley Row? I said, well, actually, I'm going to Loseley House. Well, my wife's the cook there, and my twins are there. So he became a great friend, was always on the lookout if I was travelling, you know.
Yeah.
That was very funny. So these children, I never really so particularly liked children, but my goodness, you got to love them.
Of course,
You know,
yes.
with all their sort of quirks, and the ones who were you felt they were never going to be on the right roads, and the others who were absolutely sweet, and the children who used to get awful bronchitis in London, they throve. And when they saw puddles and could see themselves in a lovely big puddle in the country, their excitement was lovely. And when they were 6, I mean, a lot of them, you see, the war was still on, but they went to other houses with proper schools. I mean, we had the nursery, it was part of a nursery school, and so the nursery school teachers looked after them then.
Yes.
But once they got to 6, they had to go. And in the end, I must say, very, very tired. And I went back to Belfast.
What was your job? Were you teaching them or just being a
I wasn't
mummy,
teaching them at
mummy
all.
figure?
No, getting them up in the morning, potting them, charming,
Yeah.
doing their laundry, and taking them for walks frequently.
Yeah.
And
these are
just
little
really being, you know, we didn't have anything to do with them at meal times. The nursery school people gave them breakfast, we saw them for breakfast, but then they took over and did their normal day's work.
And these
we
are
bathed
children
them and put them to bed and so on.
These are children who have never been out of London.
No.
Probably won't have seen
No.
the countryside.
No.
No.
And, you know, and say that the little ones who had been, you know, some parents would say, it's wonderful, she's always had bronchitis terribly badly, and she never got bronchitis here.
Yeah. Clean air.
You know, I could have wept for the parents. They'd come down and have to leave these little loves. So, I mean, it was very easy to love them. They were very sweet on the whole.
Yes.
Some, I mean, even if they were devilish, they had that charm, you know. So anyhow, that was very interesting, and I often wonder, you know, one would love to see them because they're all old, very old now, you know, grandchildren
I think maybe
themselves.
we should try and remember their names, not at this very moment.
Yes,
and we can put them on the web. You know, we sometimes have visits in Bampton from people who were evacuated.
Oh, really?
Here.
Yes.
Yes, but I don't know.
Well, because
Yeah.
there are quite a few. I mean, I could remember the porter and his surname, and
Yeah.
Sheila and whatnot, his Colin. Sheila and Colin were his twin children
Yes.
who were with us. And I remember Colin choking, obviously got a sweet stuck in his throat, and just saw this pink little face and slapped him on the back, so nothing happened. And Mercy, we had a lovely nurse, and she went down the passage, and I said, "Nurse, quickly, Colin's got something in his throat." So she, of course, did the thing. No, finger down his throat.
Oh.
And it sort of taught me that's what you do if it happens, you know. And poor wee soul, he then burst into tears. He'd been very frightened. But you know, there was always something they'd come sort of missing, and you can't be cross.
Yes.
Say something very sweet to you. So
Yes.
that I suppose there was some maternal instinct certainly in one to do that. And then anyhow after that I came back, and they then again asked if I would do announcing. And I remember Joy Worth was one of the London people saying, you know, we had to be very much in touch with our programs if we were overrunning or whatever, telephoning London. And Joy Worth saying, "When are you coming to join us?" And I said, "Well, nobody's thought of it yet." But as I say, it was so nice when they did eventually say, "Well, please," they had a lot of them were down with flu or something. And so it was SOS, and off I went to London, and somebody took my place. And was there for the next 3.5 years until war ended. And I literally, they put me, because they knew I was leaving, and I just got married and was, you know, given in my notice. And now let me think. They put me on overseas. That was horrible. That was sort of working all through the night and coming off the morning. I mean, you were really doing recordings. You weren't meeting people. It wasn't as interesting. Anyhow, I go. I'm getting rather lost. Doing that, yes, I came off. I was doing that final thing, month with overseas, and I'd come off at dawn and been back home.
When you say with overseas, you mean the transmission is going out to the rest of the world. It's not for England. Is that what you mean? Your announcements, your talks, your news reading is going out to the rest of the world. Is it like the World Service?
They were doing, you know, troops and so on.
Oh, right. Okay.
Because the man that I was engaged to was in the Middle East, and he was the writer Dennis Johnson, who I knew in the BBC in Belfast, who says that in his book, he says New York, said, there she is, you know.
Yes.
And that was quite fun anyhow. But well, there was a party arranged anyhow. I'd left the BBC, and so that evening, and I'd one brother in the Navy, and we met up, and we were going to the Milroy. It was the nightclub that we always liked. So 6 of us went to the Milroy, and Harry Roy, who was the conductor there, I mean, I put him in the air. He always called me Big Sweetheart because he came up to my shoulder.
Really?
And you know, you've got the dance bands, the good singers, you've got fascinating lot of people to put on. But the bands, anyhow, when you went into any of the place that they were playing, you know, they knew you put the tune that you liked, and so you got your signature tune in a very sweet way. Anyhow, at midnight, a roll of drums, and Harry Roy said, "Peace, the war is over." And this was VJ Day.
Yes.
And I said, I left my job this morning and the war has ended. I mean, it was that sort of incredible feeling. You know, how neat. I was really rather thrilled by it.
Yes.
And
Can you remember any of the really dramatic things you had to announce on the news that you had? Do you remember any of those?
No, I remember that, you know, you had to be terribly sort of careful. I mean, there were various things, and particularly when the buzz bombs and things started.
Yes. Those are what were called doom
you know,
bombs.
and the proms were on.
Yeah.
Well, when you were sitting in continuity, and continuity was just, you had to keep everything going. You had, usually in your 3 days on duty and 2 off, you had a few hours of continuity, anything up to 3 hours, and you just had to make sure, and every program would telephone saying, can we possibly have an extra minute? We seem to be overrunning a bit. And you would say, no, you can't possibly, you know. And you always had to be out at 10 seconds to the hour. I mean, otherwise, you know, it meant it was invasion or something happening.
Yes.
I remember having to take, I think it was the Archbishop of Canterbury, before he gave his blessing. I had to take him off the air. We had one knob that absolutely cleared the whole thing. And my very first night there, I unfortunately did something with that and cleared the air. And Robert Robinson was one that came tearing down to the announcer's room and put it on and made some announcement. I said, oh my God, I said, I've only just arrived and I'm put down here. And I'd taken the program off the air. This meant this, you know, invasion or something was happening.
So part of your job is then, I mean, you're informing the public. It's slightly selective in that you can't give out anything too dangerous. Is that right? Or too?
You
can't talk about anything too dangerous or too disturbing.
Well, you've got to be very careful with all your fill-up music.
Oh, really? Not to do with funeral march or something.
You know, you choose your music, but when midnight news, if you're on duty down continuity, you were off 12:15 usually when they, and so you listen to the midnight news, and then they might finish at 3 minutes to a quarter past. Yeah. And so I always played Grieg, because Grieg was sort of, you know, that wasn't, I wouldn't dare play any British composers, because if anybody sitting with their ear to the thingamabob was heard, and in fact I did know one German friend who said, and he was by this time in Norway, and he said, I heard you very often with my ear to the thing like mad. And because he was in love with my sister and our voices were identical, and he knew me also, but anyhow, he said, I heard you often finishing off the program in London. Yes. And then once you heard Ditta London, and it was it's Norwegian news and Swedish, all this, there, you switched off, and that was bed. And sleeping in the studio, you know, camp beds were all sorts of around the place. Yes.
What about this myth about the announcers wearing evening dress?
Well, that was they didn't ever do that in the war.
No.
No.
So you were allowed to dress in.
I mean, everybody turned up and all. But if you were going to do a public thing, and frequently one would have to be on a platform and announcing to quite an audience. I did one to the Faroe Islands, I think. So there's a lot of, will you please just watch me when when 10 seconds to the time, I want you to be quiet, and then I'll make my announcement, and then we'll get going on the program. Yeah. And so then you didn't turn up in your everyday kit sort of thing, you know, because otherwise you could dress as you pleased, absolutely. But you just thought, for the sake of the BBC, you did put the best foot forward if you're making a public appearance, which didn't often happen.
Did you have to talk about things that upset you, so that you're...
No.
You know?
No. I mean, really and truly, we were only sort of putting on programs, and as they being careful what you said. I mean, if you were putting on the morning records, and here's the thing, oh, what a beautiful morning. We can't say it's a beautiful morning here, you see, because you couldn't give anything like that away. You had to sort of think, now what am I going to say about anything? Right. You know,
nothing that could be useful to the enemy.
Precisely. Any little thing that could be dropped, you know. And so there were all sorts of funny little things that you got to know, the do's and the don'ts. And there's terrifying sort of 10 seconds too, you know. I remember I wrote about a page, because I had to take the Archbishop off. I'd sort of done an awful thing, but you know, a rule is a rule. And it had to be 10 seconds silent before the next program came on the hour. Yes. So there were, and one time when you know, you never really left, if you were in continuity, you were there. And one time I sort of thought, golly, I do want to spend a penny, so I called the announcer's room, and one of the girls was there, and I said, Prue, do come down for a sec, sit here. And we were all 2 floors down in the underground of the BBC Broadcasting House. And she said, oh, darling, I was just going out to lunch. And I said, never mind. So when I came back, and she was sitting there, she said, I see the wisdom of this. She said, it was workers' playtime. I don't know if you remember workers' playtime and that music. And then you had to put in your announcement. But in workers' playtime, apparently somebody in the audience sort of shouted out, what about the workers? And, you know, that's the sort of thing you really had to, she had to take it off and put on the bells and think again and play music.
Right, okay.
Something, you know. I mean, that would have been fun, but I mean, suppose I had left that, we don't know what would have happened. So they used to say, no, you've simply got to have a replacement if you feel you've got to leave there for anything at all. Somebody must be covering, because that is covering the whole of the service. You know, and it's vital.
Yes.
So it was and you know, occasionally, I mean, nobody. There was one man once did read a rather bad late night news, and I'd been on late in continuity, and frankly, when I was doing any announcing, I never had a drink, and some of the older men. I mean, I think, you know, I simply wasn't accustomed to it, so it didn't worry me. But Freddie Allen was one who occasionally would have sort of, and anyhow, when I went up to the announcer's room, there was only Freddie there and John Snagg, who was our darling boss, giving Freddie Allen the stick. And so I rather began to back out of the room, and he said, no, Higgy, stay here. Freddie has really been so wicked tonight, and you better hear this too, you know. And I was practiced saying, you know, so he had to have two, me overhearing this dressing down he was getting from the boss.
Whatever had he done wrong? How had he done?
Oh, he'd read things practically backwards or repeated them. Oh. Don't you remember there was a wonderful Woodruff one about the fleet being lit up, and he was good and high. I remember my father and I listening on the radio, and all he could say was, oh, it's beautiful, it's all lit up, you see. And we looked at each other and said, my God, he's so high.
Yes, okay.
And so, you know, you can hear I mean, you can detect things on a voice coming over. I'm sure you can detect I've got a cold in my nose. But just little inflections and so on that aren't quite as clear as they should be.
Yes. Okay.
Anyhow, it was a lovely war job, and I say it was so lovely that it sort of when it all ended together. Remember the first time there were five announcers. Well, there were 6 announcers, but one was on duty presumably, and the 6 of us were all outside the palace, waving at the Queen, the King, and the princesses, and Churchill, and so on.
Yes, so
and
you were there then.
Those things, you get throaty thinking of it all.
Really, yes.
So that was after VE Day.
Yes.
And then VJ Day. I can't remember except we were celebrating, and that was, you know, end of job and end of war,
Yes. But you were living in London at this time, so you're living in London through the Blitz and through
late Blitz, all the buzz bombs and whatnots, which I hated.
Yes.
The second
and the rockets.
You didn't mind those because you didn't hear them coming.
Yes.
But I mean, we'd sit in the summer. You know, I lived in Chelsea with the window open, at the big window, and I remember one night sort of watching, because the very first one that came over, that was weird, because I shared a house with Wendy Bedell, who was another of the announcers, and we were thinking about going to bed, sort of 10:30 something, and we heard sort of foot. I said, oh, darling, it's very close, you know, going overhead. I said, it's one of our planes in awful trouble. And 2 seconds later, whoomph! And this was the first buzz bomb coming
Yes.
down on Mac Fisheries in Knightsbridge.
Yes.
And when he came into my room the next morning, brandishing the paper, and everybody said, "This is what we heard." And
Yes.
so buzz bombs were not nice.
Shall we just, well, you
Sorry.
can do it. You can just, for the sake of the children particularly, who aren't going to know what a buzz bomb is, or a doodle bug, which is
Well,
its
the
other name,
doodle bugs were buzz bombs,
describe what
yeah.
it is, yes. Do you
Yeah.
remember how to describe what it is?
Well, here's this horrible bomb that is sent off from Germany on its own, with nobody guiding it. Just as electrical things it'll be landmarked, and obviously you can get a landmark to London. So that was really hard, and then, as well as the Blitz itself, an awful lot of damage was done. And this horrible thing, which made a rather foot noise like that, coming over, and say in the distance, I remember seeing one, and then it stops, and once it stops, then it dies.
Yes. Now, up to this time, we've only had aeroplanes with men in them
And exactly.
and bombs dropped.
Yeah.
And at
Yeah.
that point,
And
from the
I-
doodlebugs coming over, we experienced this dreadful thing of an unmanned rocket,
Yeah.
if you like.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And that one only got the very sort of end of, really. The Battle of Britain and so on, you know. But I mean, they were amazing times, weren't they? You know, when one heard, and with the newsreaders, if they used to leave at about 25 to 9 for their 9 o'clock news. If they left at about 8:15, one would invariably know something new has broken. There are other things to be incorporated, new names to be mentioned, or whatever else. There's something that is not so familiar, or, you know, that there's a whole lot of new things, and so you wait avidly to hear what they were going to say. But these buzz bombs were they were very nerve-wracking, and I asked somebody, I said, you know, at one time I was doing a dawn shift, and so I had to leave, and I said, well, if I'm out in the street and one of these comes over, what do you do? And he said, well, lie down in the gutter, try and have something that's a little bit higher than you. And so, you know, one would occasionally eye the gutter, but mostly it never became necessary. But, you know, when you did hear them going over, I mean, they were maybe not going over, but that first one that did come down was literally, I mean, it was loud. And if it was just, I mean, living in the street and Mac Fisheries, I suppose, a quarter of a mile apart. Weird. And that was absolutely, it was, I found it very nerve-wracking. I did not like it. Or say when the other ones just came along, they didn't have any sort of little motor, they just were the rockets. And they landed. You didn't know they were going to land until they did. Yeah. Well, you didn't have time to sort of think, oh God, it's going to stop here, it's going to go on, or well, wherever it went. If you watched it going down, I mean, you offered a prayer, something awful was happening, you know. But London, the one thing about the war was London was wonderful. The people were lovely. And London, I don't like, because nobody pays any attention to anybody else. I mean, you could be hobbling along, you could fall over and trip and so on. Nobody touched you.
You mean now?
Everybody was so friendly.
Yes.
You were all in it together. We had that feeling that everyone, and going down, having to go down into the underground when I was doing sort of the overseas work, and that was sort of, you know, starting, or even from the BBC sometimes having to get a 6 o'clock train from Knightsbridge to Regent Street. And there were everybody tucked up in their little beds. And one very sad one was obviously...
This is as an air raid shelter,
yeah.
Isn't it? Yes.
Yeah, well, all the undergrounds were, you see. And so it was a fairly stifling thing, and not too many children. But at Knightsbridge there was one very nice young man. I'd say he was about 30 or so, tall, well-dressed, city gent, white collar, bowler hat, briefcase, you know, as one had, umbrella and everything else. And he had one very large sheet of brown paper, which he would spread. And when I arrived in the morning, he'd have slept on that piece of brown paper, and he was folding it up and putting it in his briefcase and going off with his umbrella back to the city, you know, and clearly frightened, and wouldn't admit it, so to speak.
This is
You know, I mean,
isn't it?
there was something that worried me awfully, that he was obviously pretending he wasn't going to let anybody know that he had stayed in the shelter all night, and so he wasn't going to try and get a bunk or anything, but just this one sheet of brown paper. You know, you sort of almost got to know people, because they did come back to the same thing, and so they knew when you'd walk in, there was everything was very sort of comradely or something, you know, that people did acknowledge each other in a way. And I mean, the other thing in the BBC was sort of walking down as you were right in the blackout, and you might have to get from Broadcasting House, well, if you don't know sort of London, down to Lower Regent Street, which is about a mile and a half, and it might be sort of thick, foggy night. So you felt that nothing was going to arrive, overhead possibly, but you'd have to walk down, literally going past Liberties and so on, with your hands almost on the windows of the shops, because you couldn't see.
Yeah.
And then occasionally you might be stopped by a lonely American soldier.
Oh, really?
And you'd say, honey, I'm awfully sorry, please go and find somebody else, but I've got to be down there in half an hour and go in the air. And you'd set off quickly, you know. I mean, one felt sorry for them. You almost felt we'd go and have a cup of coffee with them, because they were very lost. And so we found that these coming home and coming out late. But whatever the weather you had to get to, whatever outside broadcast place you had to get to, and it could be sometimes were taken in an armoured car. There was I think one armoured car. Well, that didn't go very far with the announcers.
Yeah.
However, that really my war was mainly sort of BBC, you know, apart from the evacuees, and say trying to get into the other things, because I was acting, and the Wren said, yes, well, if you like to come in now. I said, no, I can't wait. We're doing the Barracks of Wimpole Street, the best part I ever had, being Elizabeth. And I said, I can't do it until this run is finished. Oh, well, you know, so they really weren't interested in me. I think I thought of the Air Force first. And they hadn't any more uniforms, so you couldn't do anything quickly.
Yes.
And that was why in the end I didn't join. And then the 80 years, somebody said, must join the Ants. So this was in Belfast. I had to report a huge truck and several very tough Ants, you know, drivers and whatnot, and about 6 recruits put in the back, and then they called for this recruit and said, just be careful, because you've got a lot of weight, and you don't go too fast because it takes much longer to brake, you know. So it was rather fun anyhow to try driving a truck. And so they said, that's okay, pass that. And then one went and was interviewed, and any quirks? I said, well, I can't eat anything liverish. I can't eat sort of that sort of food. Oh, that was really a stumbling block, because clearly I was going to be given an awful lot of it, you see, ghastly stuff. And so in the end they said, well, we'll have to see about that. And I got home and I thought, I simply couldn't bear it. I simply couldn't bear that. You know, the other one, the 80 years didn't appeal to me as much somehow. And so I telephoned and said, I'm awfully sorry, cancel all that. Yes. Well, then all these other things
happened, so it didn't matter. Yes.
So one wasn't exactly idle.
Yes. Now, right at the end of the war, you've just got married. Is that right?
No, I got married after the war.
Just after the war. And then just talk a little bit about how the Bampton connection, because in a way we're finished with the wartime experience. Now let's just go on how you come to be in Bampton.
After wartime, and my marriage had broken up, or I decided it had. You know, we needn't go into reasons and things. He was very nice, and I sort of thought, well, where am I going to take a lovely Nanny Ann? And Nanny is a Bampton woman who has just sadly died, Anne Shergold. She had worked for my mother in the north of Ireland, where I lived, and really was rather keen to come to England, I think. She wasn't terribly happy, but she was. A great friend of hers had married and come to England. So my mamma said, I think that Anne should go with you. And I mean, I must talk about Anne, because there she's lived for 56 years in Bampton, and just a lovely, lovely lady, as everybody knows. But I didn't know quite sort of where to go, you know, where I was going to put the three of my daughter was two, and Nanny Ann and myself. And then my sister was in Bampton, living in, it was called St. Stephen's then, Kilmore House, which the old lady had died, and that was to let, furnished, and her husband was at Shrivenham. So she arrived there with three small children, and Nanny, and I thought, well, right, I'll go see if there's anything in Bampton. So I came over, and I remember...
Okay, you came out on the train.
Yes, what I was sort of saying is I came down by train. I forget where I came from, but obviously I had to do the final bit from Oxford to here in those days, and was met with my sister driving it to Bampton. I'm always, every time I take that road between Briars and here, my sister saying, there's our steeple.
Yes.
And there was Mary's steeple. And every time I do it, and everybody I drive there, I said, there's our steeple, you know. And
It's a wonderful view.
we didn't know quite where to live, and somebody said they might find a flat for us in fact, in a little place. And I said, no, it was a bit here and a bit there and a bit the other, you know. And then she said, well, there's a tiny cottage at my gate. Very nice lady. Has gone to Ireland from there, and, you know, you might think about it. So I wrote, I don't know how many letters to this dear Mrs. Fitch, she was, Dorothy Fitch, who was a carver, wood
Really?
carver.
Oh.
And then I thought, I kept tearing them up, and then I just sort of sat down and wrote, said, your little home would be just absolute heaven for us for a little while if we could sort of fit in as Annie and my small child and myself. And they had the most charming letters saying I'm absolutely delighted to be there. The funny thing was that she said when my letters arrived, we became great friends by mail, and said take any of the books that you like there, you know. And said when my letters arrived, she always thought it was from her sister. Handwriting was identical. And then when I went, there used to be the Jungle Crash shop, remember, which is now,
Jungle Crash shop.
you know, what's that tall fellow called? He died recently. It's just down where it's now a men's shaving shop, men's hairdresser shop.
Oh, you're talking Arthur Hill.
You know.
Arthur Hill, then
Yes,
the junk shop.
absolutely.
Yes, yes, yes.
And one would go in there, you know, being frightfully careful, not knock things over. And he said, you know, it's very funny, when you come in, this was when I knew here, I keep thinking it's Mrs. Fitch. So we were obviously alike. Anyhow, we were very, very happy there.
And that's Quebec Cottage.
And at Quebec Cottage,
Yes.
it was clean and sweet and nice, and it's very sad to see it now. And dear little garden, which was just perfect for a small child, and my sister at Kilmore House, St. Stephen's. And then when they left, well, we stayed on, and you know, and until there was, I can't remember exactly why, but we did go over there, and Alex had a godmother, one of my best friends, Dizzy, living in the Isle of Man, in a huge house, and she said, do come, and you know, waiting for divorce to go through. That was it, I think. Do come and live over here until that's done. So we had a year living in the Isle of Man, but that was all anyhow after the war. And Bampton, I don't know. Well, one still knew. I think Molly Rose was the only old Bampton friend that one had known. And then when, I had reason to come back to this part of the world again. Daughter said, why not go back to Oxfordshire? And I got a flat in Shipton Court, which was lovely. And then my grandson was growing up rather, and so I only had 2 bedrooms, and he was usually in a cot in my room. So I thought I need another house. And my brother, funny enough, had seen a photograph of this little house, Folly View, in the Times for sale, and sent it to me. Well, I'd already been into the agents in Burford, and they said, well, it's a rather sweet little house, you know, I think it could suit you very well.
So
Have
you
a
came
look.
back to Bampton.
And I liked all that, I didn't know if they'd done the knocking down walls or whatever, but I liked having just one large kitchen, dining room, and so on. And there were, you know, 3 floors, 3 loos, 2 bathrooms. It's a lot for a little house. And so I got a lovely little studio at the back upstairs. And so one was returned to Bampton.
Right.
And it was very funny because Dr. Rose, Bernard Rose, was very much alive in those days, and we hadn't seen each other for a long time. And I came down the stairs, my workman called up and said, "Gentleman here to see you." And somebody he said, "Mrs. Hamel," it's a strange voice, it's Dr. Rose. I said, "Oh, Bernard, you fool, how lovely to see you, you know." And so one was back with the Roses being great friends again, and ever kind and lovely, and very deeply involved in their Bampton. And that was the only one. I got to know the lady who lived in St. Stephen's. I mean, I always want to call it St. Stephen's rather than Kilmore, because the elephants I knew, they changed it to Kilmore.
Yes.
But there's this lovely little statue, you see, of St. Stephen in the porch.
I don't know why it was changed.
Yeah.
And there must be a church connection. It must be connected with the Clanfield Church, which is St. Stephen's, I think.
Yeah.
I might be wrong there. Shall we finish there, because that's tied up?
Yes, I think I can babble on forever and ever and ever.
Well,
but
let's
that anyhow,
stop recording
that
and
brings
we'll
us
babble
to when we came to Bampton, really because some of my family were temporarily living in the village.
Yes, so an accident.
It was the whole
Yes.
thing that sort of began it, really and
Yes.
truly. But I mean, it was very different for one thing. And I mean, I don't mind drawing attention to the little Quebec cottage, which
Yes.
looked so. Everybody said, "You did never live there, did you?"
Yes.
And I said, "It was absolutely adorable. It was gleaming white. The paintwork was fresh. It was sweet and clean and tidy. Lovely lady, an artist. She was, in fact, a wood carver
Really?
who went
Yes.
over to live in Bantry Bay.
Yes.
She had lived there.
Yes.
And it just suited, you know, Nanny and me and small child, with a
Yes.
little garden up the back. One trip step, quite a high one. I've got wonderful photographs for client to climb up, you know, it's
Yes.
that
Yes.
high, you know.
I didn't even know. I didn't even know it had a garden.
Beg pardon?
I didn't even know it had a garden. So there.
Oh yes, lovely little garden that goes right up to Little Place.
Yes.
Up their drive and to the wall on their right.
Yes.
Quite a good little garden.
Yes.
And I know the vicar's wife who was living there when I came back here took me up, and she had a little greenhouse. She was mad in her plants. I'm not certain she didn't have 2 little greenhouses. But I suppose the garden was as through other as the house. But on the other hand, it was something she loved. One, she was a very old lady, one understood that. But I mean, it's so pathetic now to see it really and truly. But the comical men there were, you see, one forgets that, okay, there wasn't main drainage. And certainly not in that cottage. And I know when suddenly there was a glug in the yard. And to avoid these things, there was Mr. Morse, and Mr. Morse had a horse. There was always Mr. Morse's horses. He would come round to the great big tank, and this huge thing would have to go up the middle of my house, just in the little passageway,
What,
to
a
clear
pipe?
out the
A
septic
pipe, was
tank.
it? A pipe or something? Did he?
Oh yes, a long
Long
pipe, sinewy pipe sort of thing.
Yes.
And so that happened, but that meant we had to have a new septic tank dug further on up the garden,
Yeah.
between 2 apple trees.
Yeah.
And there was a little man called Tommy, he was one of the well-known workmen, in his little soft hat, always with a drip on the end of his nose, and if he passed the window, you always saw the sun shining that drip there.
You don't remember what his name was? Tommy.
No, I just know he was Tommy.
Yes.
And I mean, obviously he'd been working in the village all his life. He dug himself so deep that one day I heard a holler and went out. He dug himself too deep for his ladder, he couldn't get out. So we had to go and get a longer ladder for Tommy to escape. But you know, one forgets such things as cesspits and so on.
Yes.
So anyhow, that was all sort of rearranged and so on. And Mr. Morse would, with his horse, and my brother-in-law, who's a soldier living at St. Stephen's, as was then Kilmore House now,
Opposite church.
he used to go around with the twin son, my twin nephews, you know, both in their 60s now, or only one alive, you know, pushing them round with the bucket and spade, and the small son saying, "Daddy calls this gold."
Yeah.
Buckets of Mr. Morse's horse's
Yeah.
droppings going
Yeah.
in the garden,
Yeah.
and all those sweet little things. The children remember it so well too, you know.
Yeah.
All our sort of quaint things of Mr. Morse. And he was sort of one of the little characters of the village. Everybody knew Mr. Morse, you
Yes.
know.
Yes.
And
What was the date that the main drainage came? Do you remember?
What was it? Where was
The
it?
date when the main drainage came?
No idea. I mean, after I left, obviously.
Oh, was it? Okay.
It must have been, because I've no recollection of that. You know, because I was only there, what,
So late 50s.
4 years, because I think, yes, it was about, if we there about 49, and moved on, well, I think 4 years later, I think, by which time Anne had become Mr.
53.
Shergold.
She had married Francis.
Beg pardon?
She'd married Francis.
She married Francis,
Mm.
and she died last month, aged 96.
Yes. And
So
we're now
they've
in
had a
March.
long, very happy time.
Yes.
Lovely couple. So I'm trying to think schools, and then there was no school. If only there'd been this school now, I'd have loved. I think they would have. Well, I don't know how young to take them, but I've been so impressed. We've discussed that little school,
Yes,
the
yes.
junior school,
Yes.
which I think is brilliant,
Mm.
and sort of place I'd love my daughter been in,
Part
because
of.
all they're being is encouraged to do.
Mm.
But anyhow, there's Mrs. Rose and there was somebody else. I knew Celia Collins. It didn't do so well. We knew her in the dancing class, but the Rose boys were very friendly, and so we persuaded a nice lady called Mrs. Nibbs to start a little infant school. It's where the old people's home is now, whatever the house
Which
is
was
called.
called Oathurst and is now called Rose
That's right.
Bank. Yes.
And that was where she lived. And so
And she had a dancing class.
I've never knew the garden. I mean, you know,
But
we
she had
just...
a dancing class.
Oh, dance.
She said-
No, she didn't do the dancing class.
Oh.
There was dancing class. Another lady from Whitney, I think she was, and I forget her name, but that was in the town hall.
Oh,
I mean, the village hall.
yes.
And there, again, Alex used to go, and I remember Celia Collins very well there. She was, I mean, my daughter, who was a 6-footer when she died, you know, but she was always taller than other children. But Celia had the biggest blue eyes you've ever seen, this little blonde soul, and these big blue eyes. Absolutely sweet. And the dancing mistress always called my daughter Alexis, which she wasn't actually, she was Alexandra, but used to say in a very sweet way, because a lot of the old ladies used to come in to watch the dancing class. I can quite imagine, I'd adore doing it myself now, and say, "Alexis, I know you're only 3, darling, and just 3, but that is not your left foot."
What kind of dancing were they doing?
I suppose they learned all their positions.
Oh, so
And I
sort
suppose
of
they went-
ballet, early ballet.
Well, it might have been early ballet. There was one very sweet, there was, I can't remember the antique dealer's name. He lived just up the left of Broad Street there. I don't know who lives in the house now, but about the 5th house. Mr. King, I think he was. I think his name was King, comes to me. He had a very sweet daughter of about 12 who was determined to be a ballerina, and she did dance beautifully. And so, you know, any of the displays or anything, she was always the queen pin, and I think did go to other classes and so on. So, but anyhow, he then, I think whether he left before I did, I know when it came to Christmas time, I used to sort of bring, you know, because I've practically no money, sort of, what can I take to Mr. King sort of sell, so that I can buy my Christmas presents. So I used to sort of get rid of an awful lot of bits that one wasn't travelling with much, you know, it wasn't easy
Yes.
to do that.
Yeah.
But, you know, those sort of people that one got to know well, because, you know, there were shops to wander into, and the Jingle Crash, you know, that the boy down the road, who died recently, tall fellow, what's his name?
I can't think.
You'd have known his name, because everybody knew he lived with his parents then.
Oh, you mean Arthur Hill?
Arthur,
Arthur Hill, yes,
yes.
down
And I
Bridge
can never
Street,
remember
yeah.
Arthur's name, because we used to, and it was very funny, because when I went in there sometimes, I mean, he was, I suppose, about a 17-year-old or something then, I don't know, he looked much the same when one came back. And he always thought I was the lady who had owned Quebec Cottage.
Yes.
Because there was apparently a great similarity about us in sort of height and so on. And you know, we would go in there and you had about that much room before all this stacked china. It was
Yes.
such a fun place to wander into.
You had to go in sideways, didn't you?
You know, you always picked up something there.
Yes.
So, you know, those little places one misses, and the fact, I mean, even, I think it was at the same time, there was another lady who'd lived just across the way, well, before, when there were different little houses and the garage was still there and everything.
Square.
And she had another little antique shop.
Yes.
And you never know.
Yes, I remember her. The antique shop was called Quetta, I think.
I don't know, she was small and dark.
Yes, I remember her.
She, you know, one forgets what all that looked like almost then. But the fairs, when the fair came, the fair was worthwhile. We had aeroplanes out in the circle there, and your friends just sort of came for supper, and you went out. And I know that in a little cottage we had the music outside, and they were doing, it was the time of the Woody Woodpecker song.
Oh gosh, how awful.
Poor child trying to go to sleep with a ha-ha-ha going on, you know. But there was such a stir. I mean, it was fun. It was a good fair, and people flocked in, and we all enjoyed it thoroughly too.
Yes. Yes.
So it's rather a shame that the fair is
diminished.
nothing now.
It's rather diminished.
I suppose everybody can travel to places where, you know, whether it's sort of what do you call it? You know, America and
West Indies, the Far East.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, I mean, it's too simple. I mean, the grown-ups would never bother getting into an aeroplane nowadays, whereas in those days they did. You know. I think, well, life was just so much simpler.
We're so sophisticated now in our wants, aren't we?
It's a great shame.
Yes.
It's a great shame, I think. You know. Yes. And the postman, because of course when I came here, the postman's old widow used to live next door to me, and I finally tucked her off almost into a coffin, but you know, got the doctor the last time she left home. She was a dear, and it was very sweet because her daughter-in-law wanted to come back and live here, and some didn't. You know, which was a great shame because I thought they'd have been sort of Bampton returned, and the wife, who was a Bampton girl, you know, was quite keen to come back. Her husband, I think, had sort of changed his scene altogether.
Do you remember their names? Do you remember their names?
No, it wasn't Collins. It was, I think, it began with the C, but I can't remember their name.
Yeah.
I know that he used to, over at Kilmore House, and Stevens as it was, they didn't have a knocker, so he'd no way of letting them know the post was there. There wasn't even a letter thing, I don't think. There was just no porch and things. So he'd just open the door and say, "Post!" in a loud voice, you know, leave the post and close the door again. It wasn't Cannons. Might have been Cannons.
Yes, I don't remember that.
Very, very nice.
Yeah.
And then
do you remember Marjorie Pollard?
I never knew them, but they were here.
Yes.
I mean, they were both here in those days, but they were just the two ladies who lived over there. I mean, the only people really that I knew, I'm trying to, were Peggy Munster, who lived in the manor there. She was a great friend because I know our families had been connected a few back, and I'd been sort of, when she found out who I was, she sort of said, so we did, I saw her a lot, and I'm trying to think who else. There's an Irish pair living down in the other house. It's a shame these houses are not all lived in. I mean, the Donamores are so super at doing things. and old Lord Downshire used to live down here with
In the
the
Grange.
South Africans in the
Yes.
Grange.
So the people in the big houses now, apart from the two manor houses,
Yeah.
are using them like a country cottage.
Yeah.
They're not part of the village, and
No,
that's very
it's
sad.
a great shame, because I mean it's just okay if they need a house and they want a house that size, and their children or you know, the nearby boys' school, not what do you call it, one of the public schools near Oxford. Anyhow, that is why I think the sons are there really, if they wanted it. So as you say, it's not, and Colville's, I mean, the old Colonel was still alive, and Mrs. Colville, and Robert was a young man, and so as you say, those were the two major things who really did. Well, Peggy Munster did quite a lot, but Paul, her husband, used to go over to Pusey because Peggy's sister lived at Pusey, and Paul was managing the farm there. So, but there was, it all seemed to be involved in the countryside, you know, and George Collins had his fields around here and so on.
I wanted to ask about Peggy Munster. Was she responsible for the design of the garden at the manor?
I reckon she was, yes. Yes, she was, in fact, entirely, because she hadn't been there all that long when I arrived, and on the right of the drive was still all cabbages. Vegetable garden, cleaning the whole thing out before she started again.
Yes.
And she was marvellous with gardens, and so a lovely person. And she was still here when I came back to Shipton, and when I was there she died, but her mind had gone by then. This is the awful thing, minds are going.
I don't know that they're going any more than earlier, or that we're just living longer, so we're giving them a chance.
I was never aware so much of minds going. Whether, you know, one's parents ended up pretty old, but very mentally fine. And now, I mean, when one's own friend, oneself, you're aware. My goodness, I cannot remember that, and repeating yourself and so on. And I couldn't believe, because Peggy was, I suppose, into 80s by the time she died. But I never, you know, I think I sort of told you about sort of trying to, you know, these things aren't important, but you know, when you discover sort of how far somebody is, and they just sort of find my name in an address book and said, "Oh, she's a great friend of mine," I said, "Peggy, darling, that's me," and then I realised how difficult.
Yes.
And I mean, being stopped driving, which used to drive from her front door to her back gate, you know, I know the feeling, because my eyes don't let me drive far now, and I think, well, just while I can still get in the car, you know, and go, and I say, you do see things all quite differently, and I don't know why, you know, coming back to Bampton was fluke. I had no intention of coming back here. But as I say, I just needed another bedroom rather than the house that I was in.
Yes.
And I think...
So those were the two houses you lived in. You lived in Quebec Cottage first, and then you came back to this one, which is number 2 Follyview Villas, isn't it?
Just Follyview.
Follyview,
Yeah.
Right. Yes.
And, I mean, villas they are, but we've got Follyview and a little stone thing up above here, 1907, I think.
Yes. Yes.
So, you know, it's a perfectly sort of adequate little house. I'd like larger rooms, and as time goes on, not bother having a top floor. But
yes,
you know,
I know the feeling. Yes.
It's well done, and I'm trying to think what else now. And then, you know, I was thinking, isn't there John Bullen, who of course you'd have known also.
I did know.
He was the doctor then, and there was another old Scottish doctor who I never really knew, although I met his old wife. She was the one who said, "Oh, but you know, Quebec Cottage is going to be on not on the market, but to let soon." But of course, John Bullen was a blissful man, wasn't he?
Yes, I remember him very well. He used to fish, I believe. That was his hobby. Do you
Oh,
remember
did
that?
he? I never knew about his fishing.
Uh-huh.
No.
But, you know, and I didn't have a telephone, but I used to have to come and use the village telephone there.
Yes.
If in extreme, he was always there on a flash.
Mm.
You know, there were few people. You see, and from the Rose's house, Bampton house, you looked out over fields.
Yes.
Where all those hundreds of houses are.
Mm.
This is why, you know, Bampton doesn't feel remotely the same. It was a country place then.
Mm.
And now people say it's a small town or a large village.
Well, I think
Really?
even then it was a town, because we have a town's charter. We're a
Oh.
market town officially.
Oh, do we?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Because, you know, I'd felt it qualifies more as a large village in that, you know, we've got no chemist shops. I mean, it's the shops that there aren't. But otherwise, shops are very adequate.
Yes,
and
wonderful.
workmen.
Yes,
And so on. It's just a
Yes.
case of getting to know them all, isn't
yes,
it?
it is.
But
yes.
um,
do you want to finish there, or
Hmm?
do you want to finish there?
I think that I'm trying to think what you said, Fritz, and the coal man and so on. Yes, in Silversleep when I was here, a Frenchman sent me the first coloured stockings just came in, and he sent me a pair of beautiful sort of woolen cyclamen stockings,
Oh.
which I wore quite happily in the village. And the little Tommy Papworth, presumably, with Granson, Henry the Eighth, I am, and I suppose they'd seen a picture of gentlemen in coloured stockings.
Yes.
You know, one, and they say Colwood's Wheels and so on, Robert Winster's there, John Bullen. I don't remember any sort of exhibitions happening in the town hall, or concerts being given and so on, or opera. You know, those are all newly established things.
Yes.
There
was cinema. Do you remember cinema?
No.
Cinema in the 60s. I remember films showing in the village hall.
Oh well, that had gone by then.
Yes.
Well,
Yes.
that was something, I suppose. And Constable bookshops. I only know Pap Constable, who's still here, and I know we left our cat. I'd felt that Alex must grow up with some animal, and so Belinda Bell, we left with them, who lived to be in her early 20s. You know.
Yes.
I think there was one family of constables lives next door to Quebec Cottage. But to say one remembers, and then even another man, he does some garden things around here, and he marched up to the door one day, 6 months, a year ago, and said, "Just the lady I want to see," and he quoted a woman's name. "Do you remember her?" And I just thought and thought "Yes, I do." I said, "But you the fellow?" "Yes." And this was a little family. There were about 3 of them, and the mother. I mean, lot of children, I forget, and so various little sort of dresses Alex had grown out of and things. I'd say this would be useful for her and so on. And so occasionally it would come the spring or anything. They could find things in hedgerows. They'd arrive with a little bunch of the primroses.
Yes.
Thank
Very
you,
nice.
for mother and so on.
Yes.
And this was the wee fellow come and said, "Want some gardening done?"
Oh,
that
really?
I loved.
Yes.
You know, that had a nice feeling, coming full circle almost.
Yes.
And the fact he was still here, and he said, "I remember you very well, you know, little soul."
Yes.
And they could hardly reach the knocker, you know.
Mm.
So that really doesn't supply much, but it just, I mean, it's vivid with me, but vivid from over 50 years ago, you know, and heavens above, it's been so much since then that it's hard to really think of sort of what one's feelings were. I mean, I loved the vicarage being the vicarage, and the vicar, Mr. Bateman, his wife, were absolute honeys. She was a very good artist.
Was she?
And their daughter had a nice little shop in Burford. I forget if she sold books, but she also was a very good photographer, Joan Bateman. And Mrs.
I have
Bateman...
some photographs of her. She did photographs of bits of the interior of the church.
Oh, really?
Yes, so she was the vicar's daughter. Yes,
That's
interesting.
right, yeah. I don't know if this was the only child, the only one certainly that that I knew here, and you know we knew each other well. And Mrs. Bateman organised a church spring clean every spring, and that was huge fun. We all turned out like mad. And there was a Miss Cooper. Did you know Miss Cooper?
Not that
And
I
her
remember.
friend, she lived round that lane. I couldn't tell you what the little. I couldn't point out. You know, if you go around, well, no, I'm so bad remembering names now. Anyhow, she was a village gardener, and she was a splendid character. And my brother-in-law, the soldier, he was asked, you know, would he do the south door? No, the east, the west door. The windows up a high ladder. He wasn't frightfully keen. I would do it, says Miss Cooper. You see, up she goes with the sponges and things.
And
And
she was
we-
a village gardener.
Well, she was just one of the strong village ladies.
Yes.
And she lived with another great friend of hers, I forget her name. But she did the village. She used to come and garden for me. But she was such a character. I always remember talking about, you know, and I loved them cotton Easters.
Yes.
Tony S was always cotton Easters.
Yes.
But she would go climbing the ladder very happily. And we had to, you know, it hadn't been touched. We would linseed the pews. I mean, it obviously was absorbed in one go. Otherwise, I suppose everybody would have their
sticky.
clothes covered in oil, wouldn't they?
Yes.
But we really left the church looking absolutely gleaming. And the vicar came in one day and said, do come out and see, look at Alex. And Alex was, I think I may have told you this, astride a tombstone saying, ride a course to Banbury Cross, you know. She could just get the leg over this little tombstone. But there was, you know, there's the one enjoyed this. There was a village, a community village. It probably still is, but I just don't join it, I'm afraid.
Yes, it is very good as a sense of community.
It is.
I hope it doesn't grow any bigger, because I think we'll lose it if it grows too big.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of things and a lot of people joining in, which is wonderful.
Yeah. Because it's either one of those things you like being in or you don't, and I've become more and more withdrawn as I've grown older. I'm very happy being well, just seeing people when I want to see them, so to speak. And well, it's maddening not being able to drive, because I've got so many friends who are within nice drivable distance, but they're not going to go on coming and fetching me to go and have luncheon with them. You know, it's going to trace of 20 miles each way.
Yes.
So those things are not so hot, but then you can't have everything. So as I say, I think Bampton ticks over. It's rather a shame it's so crowded now with this road at Standlake, I think, that's causing it, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Well, Con, thank you very much. I think we'll
Well, I
we'll
don't know
stop
whether
with
that's any. It's just little snippets.
Yes.